Somalia has long been known for its struggles with poverty, instability, and a lack of centralized government. However, there is another part of Somalia's story that has captured the world's attention, the story of the Somali pirates. These pirates, who became infamous for hijacking ships and demanding ransoms, were seen by much of the world as villains, criminals, and a threat to international shipping lanes. But from the perspective of many Somalis, the pirates were not villains. They were, in fact, heroes, Robin Hoods of the sea, fighting back against the foreign powers that had taken advantage of their country's instability. In this narrative, pirates were not born from a desire for personal gain or malevolent intentions, but from desperation, survival, and a response to years of exploitation and neglect. The pirates were not simply lawless criminals. They were the product of a broken system, a system that had allowed foreign powers to plunder Somalia's natural resources without oversight or consequence. These pirates were born from a sense of injustice, a response to foreign fishing fleets and waste disposal companies that had been illegally exploiting Somali waters for decades. The concept of piracy, for many of these young men, was not only about stealing from others, but about protecting their land, their livelihoods, and their rights. It was a complex issue, one that could not be neatly summed up as simple villainy or heroism. In the end, the pirates were both victims and perpetrators, driven by necessity and fueled by the ongoing degradation of their homeland. The history of piracy off the coast of Somalia is inextricably linked to the history of the country itself. Somalia was once a British and Italian colony. Northern Somalia was controlled by the British, while southern Somalia fell under Italian rule. These colonial powers governed their respective territories until 1960, when Somalia became an independent nation. The newly independent country was formed by the unification of these two regions, creating the modern state of Somalia. This moment was celebrated as the birth of a new nation. However, the optimism that accompanied independence quickly gave way to political turmoil. 9 years after independence, in 1969, President Abdurrashid Ali Shermarke was assassinated by his bodyguards, setting off a chain of events that would plunge the country into a dictatorship. The rise of military rule under General Syed Barre heralded the beginning of a new era of tension, division, and repression. While some countries use race or religion to divide their citizens, Somali dictators used clan identities to maintain power. The clan-based system became deeply entrenched in Somali society, and the country was divided along clan lines. The economy began to falter, and the social fabric of the nation began to unravel. It was within this atmosphere of division and unrest that piracy began to take root. In the 1980s, Somalia's coastal waters were abundant with fish, attracting foreign fishing vessels from around the world. However, as the country descended into civil war and the central government collapsed, the Coast Guard ceased to function. Foreign vessels began fishing illegally in Somali waters, taking valuable tuna and other species. This unchecked exploitation devastated local fishermen, who had long relied on the sea for their livelihoods. Many fishermen, powerless to stop the foreign fleets, began to patrol their own waters, protecting their resources and attempting to keep the invaders at bay. But this defense soon morphed into something more sinister. Foreign companies were also dumping toxic waste along Somalia's coastline, contributing to the environmental destruction of the area. As the situation deteriorated, the local fishermen, with no state authority to protect them, began to resort to more drastic measures. They started hijacking foreign ships, seizing them, and demanding ransom for their release. This marked the birth of piracy in Somalia. What began as a desperate act of resistance soon turned into an industry. By the late 1990s, piracy off the coast of Somalia had become a well-organized operation. Armed gangs, often with the backing of local warlords, began to target not just fishing vessels, but also larger commercial cargo ships. The pirates used speedboats to pursue and board these ships, often within minutes of attacking. Once aboard, the pirates would hold the crew hostage, demanding a ransom for their safe return. The money they received from these ransoms provided the pirates with the means to continue their operations, and as piracy became more lucrative, more young men were drawn into the trade. During the period of intense piracy from 2005 to 2012, Somalia's Puntland region, in the northern part of the country, became known as the epicenter of Somali piracy. A coastal city in Puntland, was considered the pirates' capital. In this area, piracy became a full-fledged industry, with investors, financiers, and a complex system of operations supporting the pirates' activities. The pirates, who had once used rudimentary fishing boats, now had access to state-of-the-art speedboats, weapons, and tracking devices. This allowed them to target larger ships, including those belonging to multinational corporations. The pirates' methods were simple yet effective. After targeting a ship, the pirates would approach it in their speedboats, waving weapons and shouting at the crew to stop the ship. If the crew failed to comply, the pirates would fire warning shots. The pirates also carried rope ladders with hooks, which they would throw onto the ship to climb aboard. Once on the ship, the pirates would take control of the vessel and demand a ransom for the crew's release. These hijackings often occurred within half an hour, making it a fast and efficient operation. Once the pirates had seized control of a ship, they would steer it to a safe port in Somalia, where the crew would be held hostage until the ransom was paid. The ransom payments were typically transferred through international banks in London or Dubai, and the money was delivered to the pirates using parachutes, which had become an iconic image of Somali piracy. The pirates would then divide the ransom money, with half going to the pirates who had hijacked the ship, 1/3 going to the investors who had funded the operation, and the rest distributed to the crew that had guarded the hostages. In some cases, a portion of the ransom would also be given to the local community, particularly to the poor and disabled, which helped build the pirates' reputation as local heroes. Even though they were committing acts of piracy, the Somali pirates viewed their actions as justified, even righteous. They saw themselves as protectors of the sea, fighting against the foreign powers that had long exploited their resources. The pirates often referred to themselves as Badadinta Bada, or the saviors of the sea. They felt that they were providing a kind of tax for the people of Somalia, as the country had no functional government to collect taxes. The pirates, in their view, were fulfilling a role that the central government should have played, protecting the country's resources and maintaining some level of order in a lawless environment. Despite the widespread perception of pirates as violent criminals, many hostages reported being treated relatively well during their captivity. The pirates, for the most part, did not harm the crew members they held hostage. In fact, many pirates saw themselves as victims of a larger system, one that had left them with no other option but to resort to piracy. They viewed themselves as men who had no choice but to steal in order to survive in a country where poverty and instability were the norm. As piracy became more organized and lucrative, the international community began to take notice. In response to the growing threat of piracy, various international naval forces began to patrol the waters off the coast of Somalia. These forces launched anti-piracy operations, providing security for shipping lanes and attempting to combat the piracy crisis. The United Nations also got involved, with international efforts to stabilize Somalia's political situation and curb the illegal activities that had contributed to the rise of piracy. Over time, the combination of naval patrols, international intervention, and the Somali government's increased focus on the issue helped to reduce piracy off the coast of Somalia. However, the underlying issues that fueled piracy, poverty, political instability, and the exploitation of Somalia's resources have not been fully addressed. Piracy may have decreased, but Somalia's future remains uncertain. The story of the Somali pirates is not just the story of criminals who preyed on innocent ships, it is also the story of a nation ravaged by civil war, foreign exploitation, and a desperate fight for survival. In the end, Somalia's pirates were not so different from other rebels in the world's history. They were individuals who fought for their survival, for their country's resources, and for the protection of their people, even if their methods were violent and unlawful. Whether viewed as villains or heroes, the Somali pirates remain an indelible part of the country's modern history, a symbol of the chaos and struggle that has defined Somalia's past and continues to shape its future. Thank you for watching. For more interesting documentaries, subscribe to Universal Infacts and leave your remarks below.